For longtime viewers, this one will start out with a familiar story, but because anyone's deconstruction story is infinitely complex, there are still parts I haven't spoken about before. That's where this video comes in. Back when I was in college and still very Christian, loved ones of mine got into an essential oils multi-level marketing scheme called Young Living Essential Oils. I'm sure plenty of you have heard that by now. I was ignorantly supportive of it at first, but eventually looked into the company and noticed some things that I found disturbing. Just to name a few, the leader, Gary Young, had an origin story that involved a miracle and sign from God that he was meant to start the company and sell God's gift of essential oils to the world. Many people had left the company, citing its lies and abuse. The company proudly contradicted science-based medicine, claiming to have special, basically sacred knowledge of the secrets to good health, which science-based medicine lacked. There are many, many other red flags I noticed at this time, but for the sake of keeping this video concise, I'll keep it to the 3 issues I just mentioned. Concerned for the well-being of those I knew within the company, I presented them with what I found. To my surprise, they had already developed rehearsed responses to some of the problems I pointed out, including the 3 red flags I mentioned. You don't know Gary Young. How can you say he didn't experience the miracle I know he did? You're really going to cast doubt on someone else's experience with God and then call me a liar? The people who left the company and criticize it now are just people who failed to make it work for them because they didn't work hard enough. It's their personal failure, not the company's, and all their talk of abuse is just false. They're just lying because they're bitter about their own failure. Yes, the company does contradict medical science because organizations which rely on medical science, like the FDA, only exist to suppress and persecute people who have the truth about good health because they can't make a profit off that truth. At the time, I was close to completing my degree in psychology, and what I heard seemed to rely on common cognitive heuristics. Miracle stories are emotionally captivating. They easily grab your attention, and for a lot of people, inspire a very pleasant sense of awe and hope. Also, if the teller of a miracle story cites your religious system as its cause, you're not only more likely to believe it, but also to attach the miracle story to your sense of identity. The miracle belongs to the religious system, you belong to the religious system, so you and the miracle story belong together. Which means believers in that miracle story take any questioning of it as a personal insult. Further, attributing any criticism of your group to the moral or personal failings of critics appeals to the inherent groupish psychology which all humans share. It protects the in-group and smears the out-group. Finally, claims of special knowledge give the in-group a feeling of unique importance and control, a reassuring feeling, especially for those with difficult and confusing medical issues. Persecution narratives are also powerful tools for group protection and proliferation. As I've discussed in previous videos, sociological research points to the idea that in-groups often see persecution as a sign that they are doing something right. Plus, humans are more likely to believe outlandish claims if they perceive those making the claims as willing to make or believe those claims even if it costs them. I began to see these ideas as unique in what they added to the belief system. They simultaneously lowered the likelihood that the belief system was true, as miracles and conspiracies are complex events with a low likelihood, and made the belief system more convincing. I started thinking of these ideas as what I then called thought traps, because they circumvented rational thinking in order to help a belief system reproduce or retain its believers. So I tried explaining this to those I knew within the company. I tried to make the point that the narratives of this company were identical to those used by harmful cults and simply preyed on the innate heuristics of human cognition in order to manipulate people. This was even true of their rehearsed responses, which they had heard from others in the company and just repeated. This did not get through to them, unfortunately. Only later did I come to understand that they didn't necessarily deny that these things were identical to what other manipulative groups say and believe. They simply chose to believe that this was coincidence, and that the truth sometimes looks suspiciously like manipulative lies. News media companies are particularly well aware of human biases, especially in their own viewer or reader base. They'll disproportionately publish stories which confirm their base's political bias because their base is more likely to engage with stories like that. This causes a problem for those of us who want to actively challenge our biases when reading the news. Which is why I'm happy to have Ground News as today's sponsor once again, because it's really the only tool out there, as far as I can tell, that makes it easy to call out bias in the media and in ourselves as readers. The website and app aggregates news articles from thousands of publications around the world, so you can get access to different perspectives all in one place. For example, let's look at a story about a survey of priests in England done by The Times. Interestingly, 13 sources are covering this, and over 80% of them are right-leaning outlets. A quick comparison of the headlines reveals how this story can be framed in different ways. The left highlights that most of the priests surveyed back gay marriage. The center headline from The Times itself vaguely refers to shifting attitudes. And this right headline warns that priests want to loosen LGBT policies. So you can start to see why, with this framing, right-leaning publications have decided to pick this up and run with it. But it is an interesting story that we wouldn't have seen if we typically don't get our information from these sources. This is why I regularly reference their My News Bias dashboard, where I can see a breakdown of my own reading habits and stay on top of issues I might be missing. This is actually how I get my news in my day-to-day, so I can't recommend it enough. So go to ground.news/skeptic or click the link in the description and pinned comment to try it out. Subscribe through my link before October 15th and you'll get 30% off unlimited access. Okay, now back to the video. Fast forward to many months later, I had begun questioning my Christian faith. My faith was definitely still there, but I did have some doubts. Many of you already know several philosophical questions I began wrestling with at this time. One of them was, is the following a good resolution to the apparent contradictions in Christian doctrine? God's ways are higher than ours, so we shouldn't expect to understand him. I thought, no, because as I've discussed in previous videos now, if God's ways are beyond human understanding, then it's not only that we can't question God at times, but that we can't understand God at all. This defense ultimately contradicts the ideas of believers who use it, even if it might momentarily make their beliefs more convincing by circumventing rational thinking. Wait, I thought, is this a thought trap like the company uses? Yeah, I mean, it does exactly the same thing. It doesn't actually answer the question of why God does certain things, and even undermines any statement that God does do any specific thing. But if believed, it prevents the person who holds it from leaving the larger belief in God. It can even be used to blame rational questions about God on the ignorance and weakness of the person asking questions. Basically, it's a feature that, if added to a belief system, prevents those inside the belief system from discarding it when valid questions or criticisms are present. The only value it added to the belief system was a greater ability to replicate and retain its adherents. This was huge for me. I remember sitting alone in my apartment in silence for several minutes, shocked that something I had believed my entire life was most likely nothing more than a feature which my religion had adopted in order to maintain growth. Soon I noticed this creeping sense of horror slowly rising to the surface. I knew the next question I needed to ask myself, but I hoped that if I sat there quietly for long enough, it would slip back into my unconscious mind and stay there. It didn't. Finally, accepting that the question wasn't going away, I asked myself, are there any other parts of my Christian beliefs that could just be features that help the religion reproduce and retain believers? Maybe, I thought. Are there any other things I've been taught about Christianity that appeal to humans' groupish psychology or tendency to believe things based on strong emotions? It did not take me very long to think of quite a few. People who disbelieve just do so because they want to sin. Suspiciously convenient for a Christian in-group. The alternative to finding meaning through Christianity is hopeless, crushing nihilism, terrifying for anyone who dares to doubt their faith. If you don't trust Jesus for your salvation, you'll burn in hell for all eternity. Probably the most extreme scare tactic I could even imagine. I tried to think of any alternative explanation for these features of Christian doctrine. I considered that they really are true, but Now that I thought about it critically, I realized these ideas had not been presented to me or most others alongside solid evidence that they were true. No one had done or presented any psychological research to demonstrate that non-believers are just motivated by a desire to sin, or that non-Christians were always depressed nihilists. Likewise, no one had proof that hell was a real place. All of these things were stories and were presented in a highly emotive way, absent any real evidence. Still, maybe they were true and just coincidentally looked like ideas meant to propagate or reinforce the belief system. I could attempt to accept that as coincidence, I thought, but that is exactly what certain others do to protect and stay in harmful cults. So if I were to do this in the case of Christianity, wouldn't I also need to reason that way in regards to all other belief systems which use these thought traps? As you all know by now, I concluded that it was more reasonable to think that these things were untrue and were what I then called thought traps. Since this happened several years ago, though, I've learned that I was not the first to come up with this notion of ideas which simply exist to reproduce themselves and whatever belief system they're attached to. There's actually a whole psychological theory related to this which has existed for decades: memetics. The original definition of meme is something like a unit of cultural information which replicates through transmission from one mind to another. Basically, it's an idea, belief, or behavior which spreads through imitation. A meme is to culture what a gene is to an organism. Just as genes replicate themselves, interact with their surrounding organism and environment, are subject to selection pressures, and evolve, so do memes. The development of the hell meme is a good illustration of how religious memes can evolve, I think. As far as scholars can tell, the earliest Jesus followers and Jesus himself, being Jews, probably did not believe in an eternal afterlife. They were apocalypticists, people who believed the world was ending very soon and that God would judge everyone according to their righteousness. The righteous would enter God's earthly kingdom, and the unrighteous would be annihilated forever in a fire. This would definitely motivate a Jewish person to take the religious movement seriously, helping the movement spread within Jewish culture. After several decades, though, the end hadn't come, which acted as a selection pressure on the meme. Lucky for its survival, it had spread to some Gentiles by this point, where it merged with a meme from Greek culture, that being the idea that people are rewarded or punished after death according to their virtue in life. This version of the meme wasn't just for Jews. Rather, it posited that God's judgment applied to everyone, and the punishment for unrighteousness wasn't annihilation, but eternal torture in a fiery afterlife. These two changes to the meme undoubtedly helped it reproduce faster than ever. It was now for anyone of any nation or culture, and it upped the stakes for those who adopted it. As bad as annihilation by fire sounds, eternal conscious torment is much worse. So those who believed it were extraordinarily motivated to spread it. Thus began a meme that would propagate for millennia. Now, a lot of you have probably heard something like this before. It was Richard Dawkins, after all, who created the term meme in the first place. You've probably heard Dawkins or Dennett call religion a set of pernicious memes, which use the believer to propagate themselves.
A child brain is a machine which obeys whatever instructions it's given by its parents, for the very good reason that I've already told you. Therefore, the child brain is also vulnerable to parasitization by viral code, which is things like, it is essential that you pray 5 times a day. If the child brain could tell which was good advice and which was bad advice, it wouldn't need the advice in the first place. That's the whole point. It needs the advice. And therefore, it is automatically vulnerable to the equivalent of computer viruses, which is what I think religions are.
This idea isn't without merit, but it isn't the whole story on religion and memetics. Any idea, belief, or behavior can be considered a meme because a meme is just something that spreads through imitation. This implies then that some memes can benefit a person or group to which it belongs. Moving or vocalizing in unison with a group, research shows, can promote cooperation within a group. So religious memes involving ritual singing, dance, or other movement can help a group get along and even thrive. The scientific method could even be considered a meme, and the power it gives a culture to produce all kinds of tools drives its reproduction. The point is, memes should not be understood as parasites feeding off a host, but rather as units of cultural information which can affect their carrier in any number of ways. The memes I spoke about in my story, or thought traps as I called them, were some which happened to reproduce by circumventing reason and triggering emotionally motivated thinking. These memes I'm happy to call pernicious because they motivate people to act out of fear or hatred rather than rational thought. Although memes like this absolutely can and do arise organically, they can also be created by con men looking to manipulate others. Seeing that the Christianity I was raised to accept and spread to others could be so well explained as a result of memetic evolution dealt a crushing blow to my belief that Christianity was divinely inspired. If God inspired this doctrine to be written down in the first place, why did it look like a collection of some of the most successful memes from various philosophical and religious traditions all packaged into one? Why did God's moral reasoning look so similar to the groupish moral reasoning of men? Why believe the biggest religion of all time was only successful through God's intervention when its doctrine demanded that you spread the faith or else? Some may feel comfortable accepting as truth a set of ideas which look suspiciously like a set of powerful and at times pernicious memes. If that's you, you have every right to do so. But I hope that at this point you can understand why I and many others do not. Thanks for watching. I've been Drew of Genetically Modified Skeptic. If you want to learn more about memes and religion, I've got a couple of recommendations. One is this video, which I made with Tirzu a while back. The other is psychologist Susan Blackmore's book, The Meme Machine, which I read in preparation for this video and really enjoyed. Thank you to my patrons for their constant love and support. If you want to hear more from me, then subscribe. As always, if you are an apostate in need, there are resources linked in the description to help you find community and mental health support. Remember to check out Ground News, be kind to each other in the comments, and until next time, stay skeptical.